Hey, this is Gina Grad.
Hi, this is Teresa Strasser.
Hi, everyone. This is Mike Errico.
Hey there. This is Casey Cavalier.
I'm Rocky Rose.
And you are listening to The Jay Franze Show.
Lucky you.
Welcome to The Jay Franze Show, a behind-the-curtain look at the entertainment industry with insights you can't pay for and stories you've never heard. Now, here's your host, Jay Franze.
Well, hello and welcome to the show. I am Jay Franze, and this is your backstage pass to the entertainment industry. This week, it's going to be a little bit different, because this week, I'll be having Tiffany Mason join me as a co-host, and we'll be talking to recording artist Dave Rhea from the band Vonray. Now, Tiffany, she recently had me on her show, Memory with a Beat, where we discussed the power of a song and the memories that arise when you hear that song. I chose the song Drinker's Hour by, Vonray. So we decided to close the loop and get Dave on the show to talk about what he thinks of when he hears the song. We'll talk to Dave about the origin of the song, what it was like being in a band with his brother Vaughn, and we'll discuss his time in the band Dust for Life. Now, Dave and I met in Orlando years ago when he and his brother Vaughn were taking over the music scene. He has become one of my best friends, and I can't wait to talk with him tonight. So if you would like to join in, comment, or fire off any questions, please head over to jayfranze.com. Now, let's get started. Dave, sir, how are you?
Doing good. Glad to be here, as always.
So good to have you, my friend. So good to have you. We have been looking forward to this. Closure to our loop here. Miss Tiffany, tell us a little bit about your show to start us off.
Sure. I have a podcast called Memories with a Beat. And, we all hear that song in the grocery store, in our car, at the gym, and all of a sudden our brain is just flooded with a ton of memories. And so I love to talk to people about what those memories are, what the song is that they choose, why they chose it, and just kind of dive into what that song means to them.
All right, and let's go ahead and make the connection here to Dave. Why is it that you and Dave are on the show tonight?
Well, I was lucky enough to have you, Mr. Jay Franze, on my podcast, and you went on and on about how much you love Drinker's Hour. And Drinker's Hour is by Vonray, and Mr. Dave is part of Vonray. And so we talked a lot about your days in Orlando and watching them and getting to know them and the song Drinker's Hour and how much you loved it. And we talked about that a little bit.
I do like the song.
Mm-hmm.
Dave, I'll tell you that. I do like the song. I like the band. I even like you, Dave. You're good. You're cool. So, Dave, let's jump into our conversation tonight. Can you just tell us a little bit more about the genesis of it and why it is so important?
Yeah, well, my brother and I were fledgling artists back in the day, and my father decided to write some lyrics for us. So he's the author of those words, and he passed it along to us. Not necessarily as a poem. I think he intended us to put it to music, but because by then we were already doing music. We'd actually taken a poem that his father had written. They call him Judge because he was actually a judge. He died the January of the year I was born, and I was born in November, so we never met. But we know about him. He was not only a judge and a 25-year attorney, but he was a playwright and an actor and all these kind of things. He was a real sort of Renaissance man. And we found a bunch of his original typed out poems and took one called Ignorant Hearts and put it to music. And I think that Dad was like, well, hell, I can write,
That's funny.
And he could. I mean, my dad was, first of all, he's my dad, so I can go all over the spectrum in praise and criticism, But he was primarily a very creative guy, and he wasn't a musician, but he was a knife maker and a scrimshander and a writer and a sculptor and just all these things. So he just was creative in every direction.
Dave,
Yes.
what is a scrimshander?
It's this ancient art form where you have like the substrate would be ivory, like a tusk or something,
Okay,
right?
sure.
And they have a little scribe, a little pointed tool, and they scrape it, and then they fill in the scrapes with ink. So you have
Okay.
a clipper ship or something, you know.
Uh-huh. Okay,
So
cool.
he would do all kinds of stuff like that, but he wasn't a musician. But we always had people around. I remember growing up, always having guitar players around. We'd be playing songs at the dinner table. We'd be playing songs on the deck outside, and real guys like Blackie Farrell, Leroy Preston. In fact, listen to this. I hadn't talked to Leroy Preston in like 30 years. And I was sitting there thinking about being on this show and talking about, Dad and his music and stuff. And so I looked through my phone and just happened to have Leroy's number. I called him up and we talked for like 30 minutes.
Aw.
What are you
This
doing?
show brings people together, Dave.
Yeah, it was great. So I just talked to Leroy Preston about this, and he was one of those guys in our very early years when we were just learning how to write songs. And I guess we'd already committed to doing that, but I remember playing a song to Blackie Farrell, who's sort of like a Johnny Cash type character, old school country, black leather vest, old school country. And I had this song about being brokenhearted, and he tolerated it. He was like, all right, that's good.
He tolerated it.
He was almost encouraging about it.
Is your dad the reason why your brother got into making knives?
Oh, for sure. Yeah. Yeah.
I know your family's originally from Tennessee. Is that where your dad's from?
Yep.
So is that why, even though he's not musical himself, why music is a part of him?
Maybe. I think that he enjoyed music. He also had rheumatoid arthritis, so he could do all these things. But as far as like being able to, play a chord on a guitar, even if that was interesting to him, which I don't know if it ever really was necessarily, but I don't think he could go there. He could do obviously very intricate artwork, and he was sort of like the big swollen knuckles and stuff, but he wasn't like crippled or anything. So he was just in a lot of pain, and it looked kind of weird. But he had a lot of friends who were all singer-songwriters and would always come around, and we would always seem to have music going on. So I know he was a big fan of music.
Mm-hmm. I know Jay shared with me that your father had written the poem, I suppose.
Mm-hmm.
And I assumed maybe he had done that when you guys were younger. But it sounds like, no, that's not the case. He decided to put the pen to paper when he was older.
Yeah.
I mean, the song is clearly right about a gentleman who's drinking and it's ruining his family, right?
Right.
So do you think that your dad did that as some kind of apology, some kind of insight for you guys? How do you think that came about? What inspired him to write that poem and then to share it with you guys?
It's hard to know exactly, but it seems like it seems like obviously a contrition song, because that guy was him, and it was almost like a confession, apology. It seems like it's and almost an opportunity for him to say to people around him, "I'm aware of this," So he was great in so many ways, not so great in some other ways. Like all of us who get old, he gets greater as he ages.
Well, that's what I wanted to ask you. We hear a song like this and people think, oh, wow, that must have been a hard time or a hard life or this, that.
Yeah.
But I'm sure like anything else, it's got its ups and downs, and not every part of that life was like that. So
For sure. Yeah.
Can you get into the relationship part of it?
It was good. It was, it was sort of wasn't as tight as I hoped it would be. He was a good guy. He was never a bad dad, but sort of like the example that I'm setting as a father to my boys is almost a product of the frustration I felt as a child, you know. Later in life, I was able to get tighter with him. Like as cool things would happen, I would call him. I'd call him from the road. I'd, smoke weed with Willie and call him. And he had a dry sense of humor, and he'd be like, well, he does that with everybody. It's like calling me and telling me you had sex with a hooker, But he was good. And there was one time where I forget the circumstance, but I was out somewhere doing something cool and wanted to share it with him. And he said, David, you live a very interesting life. And to me, that was like the high point,
His way of saying he's proud of you.
Yeah. And he wasn't frigid towards us or anything like that, but it was just, he had his own thing going. And I think maybe fathering styles of this day and age are different fundamentally as far as how close you are with your kids and how much you want to champion them.
Absolutely. Times have changed.
Yeah.
Expectations are different.
Yeah. And I don't know this for sure because I can't be in their brains, but I don't think my kids ever wonder whether I'm on their side or not. They know I got their back. I can still be a dad, and I can still do the authoritative role. They don't F with dad in that way, but they know that they can come to me and trust me, and I'll encourage them. And it seems like encouragement is it seems like people starve for encouragement. And encouragement is like jet fuel for people. I suppose it's that way for me. And to be able to just encourage them when they're awesome and also encourage them when they're, striving to be better.
Yep. I would say I had a very similar experience with my father, who drank a lot, but he was definitely functioning. And
speaking of drinking, sorry.
Yeah. There were things about it that strain it, but I can completely understand how that's like almost compartmentalized. It's one piece of who that person is as a whole.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
So I think that's pretty cool that he ended up writing that poem and giving it to you guys. And then you guys went on to, make it this awesome song that we all get to enjoy now.
Yeah. And it's interesting too, because he died in 2017. So it's been a long time. And had it not been for this song, I would never talk about like, oh, my dad was an alcoholic, and he was abusive in some ways. Not to me, luckily, but earlier, that song is talking about him when he was younger. I think by the time he wrote that, he was probably my age or older, and sort of being circumspect and apologetic a little bit and confessional a little bit, and he knew by giving it to us and letting us turn it into a song that we would sing out to people, then he knew that message would hit the desired target, which was very likely my mom.
Well, music is so therapeutic. I mean,
Yeah.
Gosh, you got to use those words, but express in your own way through the notes that you put to those words.
For sure. Yeah.
What a gift, really. I mean, from your dad.
And he got to hear it a lot of times, even when we got to be bigger. I remember we were out.
He was still alive when you guys recorded it and released it.
We were playing a place in Nashville. I forget the name of it. The end or something like the end, something
the
in.
Exit in.
Yeah. And so we were out on tour with Creed at the time. And we just happened to come through Nashville because there was a show there. So we got to go stay at Dad's house for a couple of days and, we were in an RV at the time. We weren't in a bus yet, but we were still high rollers, we'd done it. It was authoritatively done,
That's pretty cool.
And so he got to come along with my stepsisters and my stepmom and a ton of friends. people we went to go like see Floyd with in 1987 and stuff like that. All of our old drinking buddies, and they all showed
Yeah.
up and they all knew the words, and it was just a homecoming show,
Yeah.
And Dad was there, so he got to hear us play Drinkers Hour,
Got to hear
many
it live
times.
to a crowd.
Yeah,
There's something about that, especially. It's not just hearing the song. It's not just hearing both of his sons up there performing it, but it's also the lyrics that he put out there. It's also the story of his life. It's also something that he created. So even though he wasn't the one performing it, it still had to feel really good for him to hear it in that scenario there.
Jay, if we can rabbit trail just for a second to the interview that you and I did, you had said, I believe, that in Orlando, when you used to hear the song, that the vision I got was everyone's drinking and they're like, yeah, Drinkers Hour. and so can you explain a little bit about that, or how that, how that crowd was, maybe the misinterpretation or just the celebratoriness of that song in that moment?
I've seen Dave perform hundreds of times at this point, whether it be a club where it's just an acoustic set, or whether it be the full-on music venues touring with Creed or whoever else. And whenever this song is played, especially when it's played in a bar, people go nuts and, they think of it almost as an anthem to drink versus the challenges of drinking. So, Dave, what kind of experiences have you had with that throughout the years?
Well, I think it's really interesting because having talked about Dad personally, I think in his mind, it was that expression, but the way it was received is, I think there was a certain element of people who were just like, yeah, drinking, yeah, But I think that a lot of people took it in and had their own circumspect moment about it. There's a lot of people who are like, yeah, we've heard a ton of feedback about it. Like, oh, you really made me sort of, come to terms with maybe a problem that I may have, So I think
How cool is that?
At that point, it goes out into the world and it becomes their story instead of like, oh, this is Dave and Vaughn's dad's story or something. I don't think anyone ever thought about it like that, except maybe fleetingly when Vaughn on stage would say, hey, my dad wrote the lyrics.
Isn't that what we all hope for when we create art, though?
Yeah.
It's not our story at that point, it's yours.
Absolutely. And what Vaughn did with it is magnificent because, it was literally a sheet of paper with words on it. And Vaughn, goes into genius mode and starts doing his like arpeggio finger picking thing. And his voice is money. He's really good at that. So he did it justice. And I think that made Dad as happy with what Vaughn did to it than just having it out there,
Sure. No, that makes sense. So when you hear it, what do you think of?
For me, it brings up memories of playing the song, like my memories of that song are being on stage in Shreveport or being on stage in Ames or somewhere.
Ames where?
Iowa?
Yes, that's where my mom lives.
Yeah. So it doesn't hit me like that message wise, just because I've ran through it so many times on stage. It's fun to play. It's got that kind of push beat. Da, 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 da.
Do you remember playing it at the reunion show?
Heck yeah, I do.
Yeah.
I remember every second of all of it.
Tell me about
of everything. I believe we were playing at the Hard Rock Live in Orlando.
Yes, sir.
Is that right? Yeah. And we had run the course of our career at this point. We got in at pretty much the worst possible moment in the music industry, and we cut this long form big record out in LA, and we were ready to go. We did that stint on Smallville. I think we had the first single off the Smallville soundtrack and all that, and then just like a wrecking ball, downloading just came in and seized the business model of the record industry, at that moment. And there was like Napster here, and there wasn't Facebook or iTunes or anything like that at the time. So that pretty much shut us down. I think I remember correctly in that when we were in New York talking with the people from Elektra, they were giving us the "We love you guys" speech. That same day, Sylvia Rohn got let go, and she was the president of Elektra. So I was sitting there thinking, man, there's no way I can talk this.
Well.
Yeah. Yeah. So anyway, so that had run its course, and we'd all sort of like gone on with our lives. And whatever the circumstances were, we ended up coming back together in 2007 and doing this reunion show. And it wasn't so far since we had been out touring, playing these songs, 25 days a month for months on end. So we still had our chops down, and we did this show, and it was super good. All the people were there. It was our hometown crowd, so they all knew the words. And
I was going to say I could hear him singing along. That was cool.
Yeah. It was cool. I think that was the last time we played together.
Yeah, I know. And the show I missed, I did not get to see that one. At least I don't believe I did.
Well, at least we got good footage of it. There's another video of that same show that's like well produced with multiple cameras and good editing and all that. So
well, if somebody would share that with me,
Yeah, I've been chopping it up and putting singles on YouTube, and I haven't forgotten to drop you that I need to drop you a Dropbox link too.
I saw you guys perform up in upstate New York as well, and people were singing your songs there too. So it wasn't just a regional thing at that point. At that point, you guys were big enough that people knew your material.
Yeah. I mean, it was bad timing, I think. Sadly, I think things would have happened differently had it been 5 years earlier, or 5 years later. It was just this dead zone. It was like you're out in the middle of the ocean and your sails just drop and there's no wind anywhere. And you're just like, what now,
Right. And it's sad, too, because we lost a lot of great music and artists at that time.
For sure.
It wasn't just your band. I mean, it was every band, every modern rock band like that coming out at that time.
Yeah.
Some of my favorites. I mean, that was probably my favorite time of rock music, and then it got just obliviated.
Yeah, the bottom just dropped out. They were like, we sell this, and now everyone can get this for free, and we don't know exactly what to do about it, And Warner Entertainment owned or owns probably still, Warner Records, Atlantic, and Elektra, and they just basically shut Elektra down. We were signed to Elektra. They basically shut Elektra down and moved people over to Atlantic, who were already making money, gold and platinum people, I guess. But they didn't know what to do.
That was the Matchbox 20
their
label.
business model was like, boom. Atlantic was, yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah, ironically, when we were we thought we were going to get signed, we played for Jason Flom in New York City at the Mercury Lounge, thinking that we would get signed to Atlantic through him.
Right.
Because we were friends with Rob Thomas. He was like a hometown guy. We knew his mom and everything. And then they also had Edwin McCain. Mm-hmm. And at the time we had Edwin McCain's management, Harrington Management out of Atlanta. So they were like, there were some good old boys. And they're like, man, it's a shoe-in, boy. It's a shoe-in. We just got to get up there and play for him, man.
And describe that night.
It was awesome because I'd never played in like the Lower East Side before.
Right.
And like, it sounds super dorky, but like when I was in high school in the late 80s, I was so into rap music. I don't even think it was hip hop yet. It was just like rap music. And there was a song by, maybe it was, this rapper named Dana Dane. And he had a song called Delancey Street. And it was this song about Delancey Street, which is like there by the alphabet avenue A, B, and C and all that. And it was about how he got mugged by some women or something. It was so rough he got mugged by women. They took his Fly Valley shoes. And so I was sitting there thinking like, I'm going to be up the street from Delancey Street. This is going to be so epic. But the show was great. It was a little hectic, It's kind of like get your shit in there and play. And
how many other bands were playing that night?
I don't know. Probably like 6 maybe.
So were you rushed in, like get on, play, and get off?
Kind of. I remember that it was like there was a lot of gear there. This was at Mercury Lounge on Houston Street. So So the place is like super deep, but not very wide. And the stage is like way in the back, and it's not very deep.
So you played Mercury Lounge with the original group of guys, or
That's right.
one form of the original group of guys.
Yep.
So when you performed there, I mean, first of all, what was it like? How'd you get up there? Was this in the RV days, or was this,
It was in the RV days, yeah. Because we had a Class C RV, right? So it's got like a van front end, and then like the camper,
right?
But it was still like 30 feet long.
The bunk above the driver.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And then we had like a 12-foot trailer on the back, and we were trying to get into Manhattan with that, right? Which seems obscene anyway. But because it had LP gas, they wouldn't let us go through any of the tunnels. So we had to drive all the way up to Harlem, basically, go across a bridge, and then drive all the way back down to Tribeca with this behemoth. I mean,
where do you park it so they don't break into it?
I wasn't driving, but I remember being on the street and having to like find a place to park so we could load our gear in there, amps and drums and all that.
Did you treat it like a mobile living room when you were driving? Like, were you just sitting at the tables and stuff and back like a tour bus?
For sure, yeah.
That's fun.
Yeah.
That
And you
seems very
it's got
safe.
the shocks, you're going down the interstate and the whole thing's doing this, and you get those sea legs, and you just learn how to like glide.
So you and
It's hard living.
the original group of guys get in this RV, the C class, and you travel all around your elbow
yeah.
to get to this location. So you get there, you load in real quick. The performance itself, how many people were in the room?
It seemed like it was packed. I mean, they weren't all there to see us, but
Right.
It's New York City. It's probably packed every night.
But you're doing a showcase, and
Right.
the other bands weren't there really doing a showcase. They're just there
Yeah.
performing for the night.
Right. And I don't think anybody knew that but us. Like we would get up there and play. I knew that Jason Flom was there, who's the Lava Atlantic guy who signed Matchbox 20 and all that.
Right.
But I never saw him or interacted with him. We were just one of the bands. And we got up there and we did our deal and got the hell out.
Now, you had a following by this point, right? I mean, people definitely knew
Yeah.
who Vonray was.
Huge
Okay.
following.
Yeah. We were on the radio, like we were like on K-Rock in
Oh,
New York,
okay.
and K-Rock in
Okay.
LA, and
I
just a
did
ton
not
of
know
radio
that.
play. Because what Elektra was doing was promoting us pre-release. So we'd cut the record
Sure.
and we hadn't released it yet. So what they were going to do, their grand plan was, we'll put them on this TV show, Smallville, that was really popular at the time. It was on the WB.
Oh, yeah.
And we like recorded an acoustic version of it in the studio. And then we went on and when we were like on the show, it was Vaughn and I in that little coffee shop that's on the show, just randomly playing like, hey, we're the band that day, and they show us,
Right.
and then they pan
Sure.
around and then the dialogue starts, It was a great push, promotionally it was great. And if, like I say, if it had been 5 years earlier,
Right.
who knows what would have happened,
Quick tangent. Do you remember Saving Sarah Marshall?
For
Yeah.
sure. Yeah.
I do, yeah.
Average Joe, also from the same area.
Oh yeah.
He was in the movie playing an acoustic set just like you did in Smallville.
That's awesome.
Same exact
Heck yeah.
setup. Anyways,
Oh,
Yeah,
for
Average
funny.
Joe.
back on track.
We've us and Average Joe are in the same Venn diagram for a long, long time.
I have to ask you, I want to know, I feel like this was around the time, when the ladies would get crazy and throw garments your way. Were you guys in committed relationships yet? Did you have that experience? And what the heck do you do with all those bras?
Well, luckily they're
wears them
small.
today.
I sold them on Facebook Marketplace. I model them myself. Hey. Now,
They fit now.
it wasn't too much like that, but
Yeah.
I wasn't in a committed relationship quite. Like I sort of paired off with who was eventually going to be my wife, and then
Aw.
eventually my ex-wife.
Oh.
But but before the Vonray thing, I was hired as a touring musician for another band out of Memphis called Dust for Life, and toured with them for like a year before Vaughn Vonray was signed at all. And we had the tour bus and we had the whole thing. And that was the real deal. We were trying to recreate the Motley Crue movie, basically. And luckily back then there weren't like smartphones or anything. So there's just no evidence at all of anything. Not that I did anything, but there's no evidence of what they
what
did.
happened that night.
Yeah.
Or those
The
nights.
VHS tapes have been burned.
They've
After the
melted.
drinker's hour.
Yes, exactly. This was 4:35 a.m.
I like it. So let's talk about that for a brief moment. I mean, you went from playing with Vaughn to playing with Dust for Life, and then back to playing with Vaughn again.
That's right.
And I know when you were on the show in the past, I asked if there was any animosity or anything for you doing that at the time. And he said no, but what was it like going from, at that time, playing from a local bar band to a band that was on tour and then coming back and starting over to play with your brother again?
Oh, man. Where do I start? The interesting thing is that we went and played that showcase in New York, and it didn't work out, and we didn't really have any sort of backup plans. But there were other people who were interested in us. There were some people from Columbia, I think, that were interested, and everybody around the perimeter was trying to sort of get something going. But the guys from Harrington were knuckleheads, and they were like, "Oh, we got this, boys, don't worry about it." And then it all went kaput, and there was no backup plan in place. And so the band pretty much shut down at that point. And Vaughn sort of went away. And at the time he was married and he had children and stuff. And meanwhile, I had literally dropped out of college halfway through my senior semester because I was too busy to be good at anything, because I was living in Gainesville, driving 150 miles multiple times a week because my band in Orlando is blowing up. We're like the biggest local thing going. And so I'm like having to do things harder than caffeine, basically. And I was just so stretched thin that I just couldn't finish. And I remember going and talking to Bill McKean, who was the chair of the journalism department at UF, and a super cool guy. He's written like the quintessential biography of Hunter Thompson, and he's written about the John Lennon and the Beatles, and he's like this really super cool guy. And I went to him sort of with my hat in my hand, and I was like, I don't think, and this is the first college professor I ever like drank a beer with.
Oh.
And I was like, I don't know what to do. I'm not going to successfully finish this semester, but here's why. It's not like I'm, smoking reefer and watching Andy Griffith at home all day. I've got this band that's like blowing up. We're about to get signed. And he was very sort of matter of fact about it and encouraging about it. And he was like, go do that, withdraw, go do that. It's probably a once in a lifetime opportunity. If it doesn't work out, call me, I'll get you back in and you could finish your one semester, no big deal.
How cool.
And so I did. And I dropped out. It was an interesting conversation with my mom to say, hey, I just dropped out of college, but I thought we were going to get signed, and,
Right.
and we were like this close to, all the elements were there to, all that had to happen differently was Jason Flom to go, oh yeah, I'll give these dudes a shot,
Right.
but it didn't. Right. So now I'm back in Orlando. The band shut down. I'm used to being one of the hot dudes in town, like we'll go play these shows and everybody's clamoring to be around us, and it's strictly local.
Your shows
But it was
had
awesome.
lines around the block for a
It was
local
nice.
band. I mean,
It was like every high school freshman's dream life,
no exaggeration. Those lines went
Yeah.
long and far.
Yeah. And so here I was one day sitting at this warehouse. I was working for like $7 an hour at this antiques warehouse. This guy who I worked for would go to Bali or whatever and buy a bunch of stuff, ship it back in a shipping container and put it in this warehouse. And I would just sit there all day going crazy with nothing to do, and no one to talk to. And it was the closest to mental illness I ever had, right? Because I was at that point, I was a derelict. I was a dropout. The band had ceased, and I didn't know what to do. And so one day I get this call from Jeff Hansen, who was Creed's manager. And he goes, hey, I'm looking for a bass player. You know anybody? I got this band out of Memphis, and their bass player is a drug addict and just cost us a show with Stone Temple Pilots, and I need a bass player. And I was like, well, I can keep my ear open, Jeff Hansen, I thought of him as like this big guy, and he was, And so then I called my brother and I was like, what are we going to do? What's going to happen? What's next? And like the Robinson brothers or the Davies brothers or whatever, we get in this big fight. Back in the day when you had phones, you could literally like slam down, like, ah! And so then I called Jeff Hansen back and I'm like, well, what about me, man? And he was like, I knew you could read between the lines. I wasn't just going to poach you out of your brother's band, but yeah. And at that point, I'd convinced my mom to fire her maid so that I could clean her house for that extra like $60 or something. And I cleaned her house 1 week. And then the next week I was flying to New York to sign with this band. And I was like,
kid.
So you ruined the life of some maid.
Yeah. Oh. And I felt like God felt sorry for me or something.
Family
just,
and
like,
kids and
picked me up, and
they're on the side of the road now. Oh, they're
coming
on here next week.
Goodness, man.
They're going to be on here next week to tell their side of the story.
Hey, there's winners and losers.
They're grown now,
Yeah, that's right.
Dave, between you and Vaughn, who's older?
He's older by 3 years.
He's older by 3 years. Yeah. So when your band very first was created, was it like, hey, Dave, come do this with me? Was it like you guys decided to do it together? How did the inception of the band happen?
He was already doing it, know, and as much as I like to claim anything, I followed him, and he's the prime mover in all of this.
Yeah.
I mean, he didn't get me the gig with Dust for Life or whatever, but he was going to college in Tennessee, and he was already writing songs, good songs that lasted throughout our career. And then he ended up moving to Florida, and I was already living there. Dad was in Tennessee, Mom was in Florida, and I was already down there living. And he ended up down there, and we ended up getting an apartment together.
Oh, cool.
And he was always playing his guitar all the time. I was just like, damn, how about a conversation,
Oh, couldn't get a word in edgewise.
Yeah. And so I ended up asking my mom to buy me a bass so I could play along with them. And she did. And I didn't know anything, fake it till you make it. And I was like heavily, I'd gone from being like White Dave, being like the rap guy, to all of a sudden discovering Pink Floyd and Led Zeppelin and Yes and all these bands. So I was like steeped in that big time. And so I was really wanting to get into playing, and emulating Roger Waters is not that difficult. Roger Waters, the bass player for Floyd. And so I just plunk along with his song, and there was never any bass to it. So unless I was playing the wrong notes, it wasn't like I was playing it wrong. and we played like little patio parties at the apartment complex, and people were loving it because Vaughn is super, super talented, and he's expressive, he's charismatic, all the things. And I could just like lean on the wall and be like, So I was just coattailing with him. And along the way, I would have some poems, and I would give it to him, and he would put them to music. Some of our like Just Waking Up, Shine,
Just Waking Up,
Unstoppable Wave. Those are all my lyrics. So I was able to collaborate with him, but he was the prime mover, and he was great at it. So when I ended up leaving the band, I know that was difficult. It wasn't difficult for me because I was like, I can do it anyway, and I was just sort of pulled out of this local scene and placed on a higher shelf somewhere, which was great vindication for me. Not that I had anything against Vaughn. I just wanted to do it. And I had
show that you could do it on your own.
Yeah. One of the top managers in the country at the time was like, hey, Dave, come be in this band. And I did.
Pretty big compliment.
So what was that
great.
like?
It was cool. It was really cool. I had to learn this. They'd already cut their record in Ardent Studios in Memphis, even though they put me on the cover art. They hadn't released it yet, so they put me on the sleeve as the bass player, and they put me in the art. I had these, like, I remember I went to New York that weekend. I went to Memphis first and auditioned for the band, and they were like, "Oh, you're in," And then the next weekend I was in New York City signing a deal with them. I was signing a deal with the band. They had already signed their deal with Wind Up, which is Creed's record label,
Right.
pretty much. And they gave me like $3,500 as the signing bonus. And their limo driver,
And at
Vinny.
that time, it was like bonus.
Yeah, and I thought, well, I'll be rich and famous forever from now on, So I went straight downtown to Soho somewhere and bought this $1,400 pair of python skin pants.
Yes.
That was just like, boom.
Dude,
was
I just
awesome.
saw those snake pants just the other day. Where'd I see them?
Probably in a video.
Yeah, I saw them somewhere. I don't know if it was, you shared a video or something, but I saw the snake pants just the other day.
They were groovy.
You signed the deal. You become part of this band. And then what was life like for that next year?
It's pretty tough, It's like touring is hard to do. And we were in a van and trailer for a long time before we got a bus. So, like, we toured for maybe 9 months in a 15-passenger van on these big tours. So, like, if you're following, like one of the tours would be Creed playing an amphitheater to 40,000 people. And, like, Three Doors Down would be opening. And then opening for Three Doors Down would be, like, Jerry Cantrell doing his solo record or something. The guy from Alice in Chains.
Mm-hmm.
And then us, playing, like, when people are still cooking breakfast, we're on the stage playing, and maybe they'll show up, I mean, it was awesome. It was awesome to be out there doing that. But it was hard living. And those guys all had buses, and they could party all night and sleep and wake up in the next town, play golf, go to sound check at 3 or 4, and we're just pulling up because we had to stay at the Motel Hell for $40 and sleep in our clothes and schlep our way 500 miles to the next town. And I remember coming back home, and I felt pretty shitty. And I went to the doctor, and there were these like little like washboard ripples in my fingernails. And the doctor was telling me that it was malnutrition and dehydration.
Oh my goodness.
So it's tough. It's hard living out there. I remember when I first got signed to this deal, I was at the Sapphire Supper Club in Orlando, and I ran into Giddy Kosala, who is the drummer for Seven Mary 3.
Yeah.
And I was like, Giddy, I got signed. I've been elevated, And he kind of looks at me in this kind of proud way or whatever, but he was like, you're not going to come back the same person.
No.
Touring is a whole different thing, and you're going to go through the crucible and you're going to come back a different person, which to me at the time, I was like, yeah, that's exactly, I don't want to be this person. I want to be the guy who's toured. Mm-hmm. So I imagined all the good things, but it was tough, man.
What was your relationship with your brother like at that time?
Not very good. Not very good. Yeah.
Yeah, I was kind of curious about the progression of your relationship, that you start this band and everything's great, and then you detour and you're with this other band, and then you guys come back. What are those conversations like, or how does that impact your relationship? And at this point where you guys are today, I feel like it's made you guys have a stronger relationship. But I mean, you speak your truth on that.
Well, I think that when that band ended, they had their crash and burn moment, but I was already out of the band because there was a point at which they decided to get their old bass player back. He cleaned up his act and romanced him into that. And I remember we did one video that was like on VH1 and, the quintessential like band on a rock playing,
Yes.
whatever. And so then we did a second, when we toured back around and ended up back in LA again, we did our second record, which was like less than a year later. But then some time went by, and then we were parked in our van, and we got the treatment back from the video. We were watching it, and I was like, wow, I can't help but notice that I'm not in this video. Right. And then they were like, well, let's talk about it after the show, you know. So then I went and played this show that night.
How could you play a show that night knowing what was coming?
You know, whatever's presenting itself as reality is what you do, basically, you know.
Yeah.
Wow.
So they gave me my walking papers, and I went home, and oddly, so I went home in disaster. Right, I'm still a dropout, all this stuff, and then that was in Arizona. The next show they were going to play was going to be in Oklahoma City, but they were going to have the old bass player back. And that at that same show, he was on the drum riser and like jumped up, but hit his head on like a light truss because it was this shitty little place called the Samurai. It's not even open anymore, and fell down and splintered his knee. And so my day-to-day manager guy, Mercado, calls me and he's like, "Hey, Dave, we need you in Chicago tomorrow." Right? And this is about a week later.
You said no.
well, no. I said, he goes, "You're the only guy who knows all these songs, and we need you in Chicago tomorrow." And so I was able to negotiate with them the money I needed to get back into school and finish. So I went out and played like another 10 shows with them to end their tour. They paid me what I needed to get back in at UF, and I finished and I graduated. And by the time I graduated, I was back in Vaughn's band, and we had signed to Elektra. And I had like the little E Elektra sign like on my border thing.
Yep. Well, let me ask you that there.
9 lives, I think.
I think so.
So what was the conversation like to get you back into the band with your brother? Who initiated that conversation?
God, I haven't thought about that in a long time. I know that I most likely brought it up to him. And at this time also, I had like all this road experience. I had like the cachet of having been signed and all that. But I think mostly it was, you know, Vaughn being nice to me, magnanimous, you know, like he let me back in the band. He could have said, "Hey, enter censored word here."
Right.
You know, so, and he benefited from me being back in the band because locally we were
Right.
the people, you know.
What happened to the bass player that was filling in your spot?
Mm-hmm.
I don't know.
Don't care.
I didn't pay a damn bit of attention to any of that.
He was back.
I know they did some stuff
in
when I was
college on your brother.
Yeah. I mean, I was busy.
That's funny.
When I got up to Memphis to audition with Dust for Life, I have my blue bass with me. I have this 5-string Fender Jazz, which Vaughn bought for me for gift. And I had my buddies. I had another friend of mine who was living with me at the time who had a black Music Man 5-string, this Ernie Ball.
Yep.
$2,000 guitar easily.
Mm-hmm.
And so I think I took his guitar with me because it was just a better guitar. But anyway, so I get to Memphis and they lost it. You know, it's in one of these kind of road cases over here, you know, and they didn't know where it was. I ended up getting it back, but I didn't have it for my rehearsal or whatever, my audition. So the guys from Dust for Life end up taking me to this music store where they just bought like, you know, stacks of Mesa Boogie double rectifiers and 4 or 5 multi-$1,000 guitars. So they were in good with this place. And they said, "This guy's going to audition for the band. Let him pick out any bass in the place to use for this audition." And I found that Warwick, which is like, it's a Warwick F&A Jazzman, like my favorite guitar, you know. And I used that and I auditioned with them. And by the end of the weekend, they were like, "All right, you got the gig and you could keep the guitar."
Stop.
I think it was like $1,800 or something. So I went home with this trophy, you know.
Do you still have it?
No, I don't. Turns out my ex-wife owned half of it, so.
Yeah, probably.
She owned half of my chopper motorcycle and half of my. Yeah. So I ended up selling it to a guy in Russia, in fact, off of eBay, to tell you how long ago it was.
That is a beautiful.
So some
bass,
Russian guy is playing it right now, I'm sure.
You know, where I first saw that bass, to take this back around, was Average Joe's band.
Really?
I forget the name. Was it Reggie was the bass player?
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
This is the bass he played.
That's awesome. Yeah, Warwick's good.
So you get back in your brother's band, And
Yeah.
how long from the time you're back in the band till you guys sign the deal?
Oh man. I think it wasn't long because from my memory, when I left to go with Dust for Life, Jeff Hansen started working with Vaughn to make a proper demo. And I don't know if it was like he felt bad. I know that he was convinced that Vaughn's talented or he wouldn't have done it at all. But maybe also like, oh, I feel bad that like I just blew a giant hole in the side of your ship by taking your bass player away, you know? So he worked with Vaughn and made a good demo. And I think the producer was, God, what was his name? He ended up sitting in for Creed as their bass player.
Oh yeah, I remember
for a
that.
while. Yeah. And he's a good producer and made it sort of a pretty harder rock version of Vaughn songs, which I think was appealing. And that ended up getting the attention of some A&R guys, and probably Jeff Hansen sending it around didn't hurt.
That was Just Waking Up in Pow.
I think so. Yeah. And I know that we worked with another guy in Tallahassee who was Creed's producer, Kurtzwig or something like that.
Right.
So we'd done some things with him to sort of try to shine those songs up a little bit, you know, into something more mainstream, more radio friendly or whatever. But the big radio breakthroughs occurred later, basically.
Right.
You know, there were more modern songs.
I get torn. There's things I like about each version of those songs. Do you feel like you have a favorite?
I don't. I just played them. You know, my favorite was playing them live. That was like my role in that world was being a musician, you know, and a songwriter.
But you wrote the song.
/ helper. Yeah. Well, my favorite delivery of the product wasn't the recordings.
Oh, it was the performance.
It was performing. Yeah. You know, and that's where my sweet spot was.
Do you think it's the energy of the audience? Do you think it's the reaction? Do you think like that you've evoked some kind of emotion, that you've touched those people, you've, you know, had some kind of moment with them? I mean, do you think that that's what it is, seeing the effect?
For sure.
When you're live, you get to see how that's really actually impacting people and enjoy it with someone.
For sure. Yeah. The direct feedback is great. Figuring out how big the crowd's going to be, you know, because we were all sort of in that local scene, at least before we signed, competing. Everybody was in competition. The only people that weren't in competition were like signed bands already. You know, Seven Mary 3 didn't have to compete locally. You know, Creed, all those guys that they've taken the rise that we all imagined, you know.
Mm-hmm. I'm very much removed from the music world compared to you guys, right? Mm-hmm. So you guys have seen the rise and fall of people, and you know, maybe somebody missed that shot. And so I feel like you got so close 2 times.
For sure.
How does the one signing make up for those 2? But then, you know, you did it later, so then you got to see your friends who started at the same time as you make it bigger than you.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, how do you process that? How does that, you know, have you and Vaughn talked about that? What is that conversation?
I think that Vaughn and I haven't talked about that a lot.
Okay.
Our relationship over the years has had its
ebb and flow
and troughs. Yeah. we're like,
like normal siblings.
Right. Exactly. You know, and so, you know, the post-rock life processing is a far flung from that world. You know, I ended up getting married, was married for 10 years. 5 of them were good. Then I got divorced, and now I've been divorced for over 10 years. And I've raised like incredibly awesome young men, which is great, you know, and now they're musicians and we're writing songs together. You know, I think I'm
cool.
I miss a lot of touring and performing and all the bravado that goes along with that.
Of course.
But I think I'm happier now. I mean, it's not like I wouldn't have wanted to have a big hit. You know, you need a big hit to have that longevity. Edwin McCain had a hit. at least one hit. You know, 7 Mary 3 had a hit.
You guys had Inside Out.
Yeah, but
Yeah.
it didn't do that was happening like as things were crumbling, basically. So we never had that. And there's sort of like a point at which you pass to where it becomes to where you can keep it going, whether or not you have support or not, you know.
A little momentum.
Yeah. And those guys now, like Jason Ross, the singer from 7 Mary 3, and like Edwin, and like the guys from Sister Hazel, Emerson Lake, it's another guy who had the what's the song? It goes, if I could only see the way
Tonic.
you love me. Yeah. So the singer from
yeah.
them, those guys will get together and go on like a tour or like a boat or whatever and play all the hits between all of them.
Right.
And everybody knows every word, you know. And so that's sort of like that equity that they have.
And they can still get together now. They can still go back on tour. And
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think you guys could do it because you had a huge, huge following. And I think the difference between you and, say, Tonic or 7 Mary 3 or even Creed, the difference is they had, like you're mentioning, that global success with the hit songs. But you guys had the die hard. Your fan base was a whole different level than their fan base.
And now I live close to Orlando, so
There you go.
I think
mean,
Jay's
the fair-
trying to talk Vaughn into doing something, so we'll see what comes of
well,
that.
I sure as heck hope so because I'm there for it.
Yeah.
Well,
It'd be interesting to see what
to
we
be
could pull off
fair,
now.
you both said yes.
That's right. Talk is cheap.
We will see.
Get it going.
We will see what the
I hope
summer
not.
brings.
All right, sir. Well, as you know, we do this thing here we call Unsung Heroes. Where we take a moment to shine the light on somebody who works behind the scenes or somebody who may have supported you along the way. Do you have anybody you would like to shine a little light on?
I'm thankful to my brother. You know, we've had a lot of rifts and a lot of ups and downs and all that, but he got me into this business. He took me back in this business. Maybe we'll even collaborate again at some point. But, you know, we've let a lot of bygones be bygones over time, and we're in a good place right now. And I'm just, I probably would have never had any of these experiences if it hadn't been for him, you know? So in a lot of ways, he's still the hero model, you know?
Aw.
Well, let's just say not someday. This summer we'll be back
Hopefully he
together.
won't hear this.
No, he won't. He doesn't listen to the show.
A big thanks to Dave for taking the time to share his stories with us. Thanks to Tiffany for joining me as a co-host tonight. And thanks to you for taking the time to hang with me here. I really do appreciate it. You know the drill. Please follow, share, and connect on all the socials. And I mean connect on all the socials. I would really love to talk to you. You can do all of this and find the links to everything mentioned over at jfranze.com/episode 61. Thanks again for listening, and I'll see you next week.
Thanks for listening to The Jay Franze Show. Make sure you visit us at jfranze.com. Follow, connect, and say hello. This episode has been brought to you by VR Knives, your source for 100% custom knives made by a true rock star. So, if you're in the market for a new piece of art, reach out to VR Knives. 407-421-5528. 407-421-5528.